Welcome to the neighborhood. We're glad you joined us. And I really have to say this. Is it just us? Is it just us, or
is everybody sick?
Is everybody sick all the time? Right? Like we have gone through. I think it was the last. It was the last episode. I can't remember if it was the last one that we released or it was two ago. I got a cold. I still feel like I've got a lingering. I was talking cold, and it was like almost like a flu-like stuff. I got knocked out for at least a day, and.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that you were like getting over it for quite some time.
Yeah.
So when I got my hair done today, but when I was talking about my hairdresser,
go to YouTube if you want to check out the new do.
It's not that different. But I was talking with my hairdresser today, and she was saying that so many of her kids are sick, and it's literally the exact same virus.
Yes.
And I think that we have had at least two people sick for probably about 3 weeks.
Yeah.
So I have multiple kids home from school, which is always such a pain because then not just are they home from school, but then they have like work to make up and then, whatever. And you just get on top of things out. Anyway, we're here. We're fine.
No, but hey, we all deal with it. It's part of life. And
especially when you have little kids, at least we don't have to deal with that.
Quick items, right? You can always jump into Cana 90 at any point, whether it be for Lent or Easter. And lots of great stuff. I've been doing these Lenten Fridays with dads for members, and it's been really, really, really fruitful and good. I've enjoyed it.
It's like a men's group.
Yeah, a little men's group. We meet on Fridays, and that's been a lot of fun. And obviously, in the month of March, you have been doing, I guess, into April too. You're doing your mother-daughter Women Wonderful Made, sold out again, and there are people. On the waiting list already for the next one, and we got. If you don't believe us, there are more and exciting things coming up. So you want to be on our newsletter list. Yeah. So make sure you subscribe to both the podcast as well as sign up for our newsletter.
Yeah, and it really does help.
New stuff coming up that you want to hear about.
And it really does help if you go and review us on iTunes, on Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Those ratings and reviews really, really do help. So help us spread the word about the podcast.
All right, so
this is one of our favorite topics.
I love it. I don't
know why. Why do we love? I love
boys.
We do.
I love the genius that God had imprinted upon the masculine soul. There's something awesome about it, and our world. It's somebody said it this way: men never more despised, never more needed in our world, and I think that's.
And who are growing the men? Families. Yeah. Families. This is where men are being grown,
So if you're a parent and you have boys, or if you are a boy, or if you know a boy, this might be interesting to you.
And I think that for young families to recognize that you are not just managing children, you're raising adults.
That's right. And
that's what we want you to be so intentional about your family life. Because what you are doing is way more important than you realize. It's not about just surviving these years with insanity within your home. It's not just about that. Even though we want you to survive, but we also want you to thrive and to really become a saint and to raise young men who are going to change the world.
That's right.
And that starts today. That doesn't start, believe me, when they turn 14, it's just like, it's like time speeds up. It's like 40, 50, then they're gone. And you're like, oh my gosh, I missed it. You can feel like that. So you got to start being intentional now.
And we are at a great spot. I mean, we have 6 daughters. Yeah, we have 6 daughters and 4 boys. One of our sons already off married, has a beautiful family, 4 children, huge healthy family, which is awesome. But we have our 3 boys at home right now.
Right.
They are awesome, and we've been through ups and downs like every kid, right?
Definitely.
But with our soon to head off to college, our junior in high school, and our in junior high, rising into 8th grade, I feel like I've got a lot going on with the testosterone in our family right now.
It's a lot of testosterone. They're all into like lifting and working out. So it is
awesome. It is awesome. And the games and the stuff we talk about, and just it's really, really, really a lot of fun. But I remember it being challenging. when we were young thinking, what are we doing here?
Yeah.
And so we do get a lot of questions about boys. And so that's what we're zeroing in on.
And actually, I'm just going to read this one question from our friend Christina. And I need to email her to make sure she knows that we're doing this question. Because the way that she worded it is it's so funny and typical. It's awesome. So I'm just going to read what she wrote. She said, "Hello. I want to ask a question in regards to violent play for a toddler." And this is really a young boy because he's 4. So my 4-year-old is obsessed with all types of toy swords, lasers, etc. If we take the toys away, it becomes a constant question of when can I get my sword back? And then turns into grabbing kitchen gadgets and making lasers out of blocks to fuel his imagination. I know this type of play is typical for a boy, but I feel like my 4-year-old and my 2-year-old son from playing with him are too young for this type of play. My husband and I don't have any exposure from this from our own childhood, so it makes us uncomfortable. I also feel like we are fueling his desire more anytime we take the toys away.
Right.
Any suggestions on how to manage it in a way that lets him explore, but also places limits on it? And what is the typical age for this type of play? I love this.
So there are parents who come to us and say, is this normal?
Yeah.
Is this right? Is this good?
Right.
And when does it start? How do we keep it within the right bounds? Because
there is something, I'm like, what is it about boys and guns and swords? So it's like, I've heard this and it is so true. That's our experience, that parents who don't allow their children to play with weapons have little boys who chew their toast into the shape of a gun. That's just the way they are.
I have a firm belief, even back in the caveman days, they pointed sticks at each other and shot each other.
Gosh.
Like there is just something that happens.
I know.
And I'm not sure how, I'm not sure why. It is there.
Yeah,
there is something about it. Whether it be swords, whether it be guns, whether it be lasers, whether it be whatever.
I really don't think that it matters, even if they've never seen violent play like on TV or anything. It is just innate in them. I just listened to this really great documentary that we'll put in the notes because you can find it on YouTube. It's 2 hours long. If you have boys, it's called Raising Cain by this psychologist named Dr. Michael Thompson.
Secular stuff.
Yes, it's secular, but I found it really nothing in it that I found objectionable. I thought it was fascinating, but one of the little vignettes in the documentary, one of the stories was about this a classroom. It looked like a Montessori classroom because they were having a class meeting,
right?
And I think that these were like 7-8-year-olds kids, and this teacher for 20 years she has taught. And one of the things that she has done is that every day for 20 years of teaching, she would sit down with every kid in her class and allow them to dictate a story to her. And she would write the story down like in their own words, which I love that. That's just so awesome.
Beautiful.
She said 70% of the stories written by boys involve some type of conflict.
Right.
And here, actually, I even remember, here's like an example. They said, one of the little boys said, there was a horse and a unicorn, and they were best friends. An old man came along and killed the horse. The unicorn killed the old man, and the unicorn was happy.
A little girl probably would not make that story.
And she said the little girls, a lot of their stories, most of their stories are not about conflict, but they're about family and friendship and, but it's just something that I find so hilarious. There's this one time I was substituting in a preschool classroom. And there was like a free time, and all the little kids could go and like play with whatever toys they wanted. They had
the freedom to do anything, right?
And so there's a group of like little boys, they're little like 4-year-old boys. And I see them, they grab all of the like My Pretty Ponies. They take all the My Pretty Ponies.
These boys, you're like, wait, what's going on?
I know. And I was like, what are they going to do? I was like, oh, this is interesting. Like maybe these boys are different than, my own little boys. And so they dump all of the Pretty Ponies in a pile. And then they proceed to have dinosaurs come over and eat the pretty ponies. And the dinosaurs are all around eating the ponies. I was cracking up. I literally took out my phone because I was going to take a picture of the dinosaurs eating the ponies. But I was like, oh
and right now,
word.
there are people who are scandalized hearing this, right? and I remember, and I didn't know it at the time, but our sons had airsoft guns, like our older teenagers.
You knew that
right?
they had airsoft guns.
I knew they had airsoft guns. But what I didn't know is that they were using them, and they were somewhat protected. I think they had eye protection on, which I guess makes it okay. But they were shooting each other, like, run by here and let me see if I can shoot you, right?
Yeah.
I don't think there are many girls who would be entering into that kind of play.
So I remember when my brothers... So I have 6 sons, but I also have 5 brothers. Grew up with 5 brothers.
4 sons.
I'm sorry. I have 4 sons, 6 daughters. 4 sons... And I grew up with 5 brothers, and they were constantly getting hurt from hurting each other. So, like, one time they, oh my gosh, one of my brothers got like a cut on his, like, right above his eye. It's like a miracle his eye didn't get knocked out. It's always a miracle, because they were on the trampoline and the other boys were throwing these like bamboo sticks, like bamboo spears that they had made, throwing them at him, and he was like, and like, that's like, dodge it. You know, it's like, of course they were doing that. Like, of course,
I know.
You know.
I have stories that I don't want to tell you about that I did when I was a kid.
So go ahead.
There was just, boys have a innate desire to do things that are stupid. No. It's not just stupid. No,
they're stupid.
Well, they're not just stupid, but there's a whole level that they get into this kind of play, and it's fun, and it's adrenaline, and it's very masculine, right?
Yeah.
And it's immature. Like, if you kept doing that when you were an adult.
But adult men just do it in different ways.
Yes,
like, they have
we have more
paintball
mature
guns,
yes.
you know?
Oh, absolutely.
And they have target shooting, and they go hunting and things like that. And actually, and our boys, when they were little, you know, of course they had like all of the regular, you know, guns and violent play. But then as they got like maybe 8 and up, between 8 and 12, they were really into airsoft. And so we had airsoft wars in our backyard with friends constantly.
We warred. It was the 2 dads. I can't remember if it was. Yeah, I think it was the dads against the sons. So I got my neighbor
at
Matt,
one point. Yeah,
and I think unless we split up, I think it was Matt and I against our boys.
Yeah,
and it was awesome.
Yeah,
it was epic, and we just ran all around our yard.
And then they would just like have their friends over, and they would just be constantly playing airsoft, which is basically shooting each other. It's like literally shooting each other with plastic pellets.
If you haven't gotten the impression already that we're not terribly opposed, but again, what we're talking about is really. But
we're going to define some things. We'll define some things for y'all.
This whole topic is primarily ordered towards boys, non-teen boys, non-adolescent boys, right?
Yes.
So before adolescence.
So and this is one thing that I do think is very, very important to remember. Anytime that we talk about child development or parenting, it always has to be seen in context of the child's age, because there's certain things that we'll talk about that you may think, oh, are you saying that my 5-year-old should do blank? No, we are not. There are different ways of approaching different ages of children. And so what we are talking about in this developmental stage of children, we're talking about before they're teenagers.
Right.
Because after teenagers, there's so many changes that happen, and that's a whole other topic that needs to be talked about.
And it doesn't mean that it all stops at that point by any means. But
it's just different. It's not everything we say is going to apply.
But we have to ask the question, why? Right? You know, we have to ask that question, why do little boys, why are they drawn to this? Because for many parents, they're raised in a culture, in a world where violence, which rightly so on some levels, violence is abhorred, and this gives that impression of, am I allowing violence in my child, or am I allowing them? Because that's a fear, right? You have your child doing something. Are they going to become a serial killer now that they do this, or are they going to think this is the right way to communicate? So we want to kind of just speak to the heart of that.
Let me just speak to that right now, is that just because your child plays with Legos doesn't mean he's going to be an architect. Just because he plays with dolls doesn't mean he's going to be a great parent. Because he plays with the stethoscope doesn't mean he's going to be a doctor.
Right.
And if he plays with guns, it doesn't mean that he's going to be a serial killer.
Right.
Okay? So that is not play for children is not, it's not something, it's not the way that they're not practicing for their future life. They are working out their present. They are working out their emotions. They're working out who they are. They're making sense of their own world. And so we need to kind of like take it down a little bit, you know?
Recognizing that there's a right and good place for this in the life of a boy. Now, there can be some boundaries. We'll talk maybe a little bit about that. Yeah. But first, just recognizing that there is something that is natural and normal and healthy with it. And it's the concept in the imagination of a boy. They don't really have a clear understanding of death the way that an adult would.
Exactly.
And I think that's crucial in all of this, so that when your little boy is shooting and dying, like I was watching some old home videos, you know, from back when our boys were really little, and they would be like, shoot, laser, boop,
Well, remember, Mikey was literally 2 years old.
Yes, he was 2 years old, and he knew he was dying on camera, but it was like a poetic, like,
like he was pretending to die when he was like, 2.
We did not teach him this.
I don't know.
But it came with him, like in his play, his concept was very, very different.
Yeah.
So when we look at our kids, first, again, like you said, we got to take a step back and say, okay, that they're not thinking of it the way we do.
Exactly.
And so their concept isn't correlated properly with what you might have it. And their play, I mean, that's really what it comes down to, is that the boys in general have more physical play as part of just who they are. Mm-hmm. And that's natural and normal. But if their play is coming kind of just from who they are, being boys, or what they witness with other kids, that's no big deal. But if it's coming from, and this is the part where, again, that young imagination is a concern, if you will, is they shouldn't be swept in secular culture or movies that are inappropriate.
This is why the boy's imagination is so, it's really important that you protect that and don't expose them to violent, like, and I mean, I don't mean
like horror movies or even because particularly when you have older kids, right? When you have kids who are like we have various ages, older kids can expose younger kids to things sooner than they ought to be, right?
Yeah.
You know, like we were talking earlier, it's like Saving Private Ryan is a great movie. I love it, right? You know, and it's a great movie, but that really isn't appropriate for a 5-year-old. You know, the way that death and war and all of that is depicted in such a way that it is, it could be very harmful to a little kid's imagination, because their understanding of death is very different at that point. So there is a balance in this, because there is a play that comes naturally from the heart of a boy.
Yeah.
And that play may result in more conflict than a girl's normal play would be. Right. There is something there, though, that we need to protect their innocence.
Yes, exactly.
And also respect their design. Mm-hmm. And for maybe for some moms, it could be for some dads who maybe didn't grow up with that as well. But we need to look at our children and recognize they have dignity and respect, and that they were designed in such a way that they ought to be able to express that. Because if they don't, it really stifles their growth and their development.
Yeah. So I think that we should need to talk about why. Okay. So now that we've established that it's natural and normal, and if we protect their innocence and we just kind of allow them to grow, what is the guidance? Or actually, before we get to the guidance, let's just talk a little bit more. Why are they doing this? Hierarchy with men and with boys is actually very important. Women need to realize this. Women are very team oriented. We are very relational.
That's right.
Hierarchy with women, no,
doesn't usually work
bad.
Well. Yeah.
We don't like hierarchy.
Right.
Women don't like, oh, she's the leader of the pack, she's at the bottom of the pack. No, women don't. Women are more sensitive. We want people to be equal. We're more communal. Men are very hierarchical.
Right.
The best example, if you think about the Little Rascals. Mm-hmm. In the Little Rascals, there is a definite leader. There's definitely the people who are the followers. There's the people at the bottom of the pack. And then all the guys in between. They're like neatly arranged in a hierarchy. Right. And that wasn't seen as something bad. That was the scene. It's like, okay, this is how we're supposed to relate.
You need to, on some level, establish the pecking order, right? And I don't believe I know very many girls who enjoyed or played often King of the Hill.
Oh, yeah.
Growing up as a kid, and I've seen our boys do this as well. If there's a pile of dirt, I'm going to run up there and say, push me off. You try to put,
And I'm like, Mike, he asked me before we did the podcast, he was like, did you ever play King of the Hill? And I do remember playing it with my brothers and sisters. And I remember thinking, this is such a stupid game.
It's the best. Comment if you like playing King of the Hill. Come on.
Because as a little girl, I was just like, oh, what's the point? Who cares if I get to be on the hill? But you're right. Like little boys, they love play. It's push the guy off the hill, So I think that kind of violence.
That's almost an analogy, but it's kind of like a metaphor of how boys,
for sure.
Again, in general, there's a sense of hierarchy. There's a sense of order and structure that they need.
And are they playing King of the Hill to be mean? To be jerk? No, they're playing. It's like no, this is fun.
Yes.
It's a game. Who is number one in our girls just are not. You put a bunch of girls together. I would bet thousands of dollars that they would never play King of the Hill.
And as you said, women are oriented towards a communal or relational. Men, masculinity is oriented towards physical communication. We know that in our marriage, right? But even on a small level, it's like boys are oriented towards tactile, kinetic engagement, right? That is much more likely that they're going to communicate through their actions than they are necessarily verbally, right? We know that the boy's brain doesn't have as close connection between the communication and their emotions and all these other things. There's a physicality to a boy. Like again, thinking about why they
want
fight.
To communicate.
It's one of their primary, I think, not exclusive, but it's a big part of how we communicate and are effective in the world.
It's how they're communicating and processing what's around them. It's either through a game, through a physical game, through sports, through shoving each other, through touching things, through working with tools.
Working with tools, like as an example, like again, go back to whether it be swords or guns or lasers or hammers and nails or whatever it might be. Or physical motion, all our kids liked riding bikes, but our boys liked riding bikes, going off ramps, doing all these extra, they added more stuff to motion. They were always felt like they were perpetual motion machines, They were ready to keep going and doing stuff.
Even if you think about infant girls are more attracted to faces.
That's right.
Infant boys are more attracted to movement.
Yeah.
And even our eyes.
That's right.
The way that the eye between a female, and we have them. We kind of draw this out a lot more in our, they sure are different podcasts, the differences between boys and girls. If you want to go back and we kind of go into that. But even just that being attracted to motion.
Right. That puts in context part of the physical nature and why sometimes boys are either aggressive or seen as aggressive in whether in their fighting or what have you. Again, it's just part of how boys communicate on some level. And not that there aren't boundaries to that. I'm not saying that.
Right. No, and we'll definitely get to that. But I think it's a good starting point to recognize that this is part of their emotional health. This is part of their mental health, really, is to be able to move and to work out. They're not going to sit down and necessarily talk out their problems, but they are going to work out their problems.
That's right.
With other boys. And really, again, kind of going back to that podcast that we did about boys and girls, or men and women, the verbal part of the brain and the emotional part of the brain in women are hardwired. They can express either verbally or written. They can put into words how they are feeling. In men, that parts of their brain are simply not hardwired. They're just not. And it's not that those emotions are not happening. They are absolutely happening, but they're not are not able to say them or express them with the same ease as women do.
Right. And there are sometimes, and it doesn't mean all the time, but there are some times when I have found myself or my boys where they're angry or they're frustrated by doing physical activities actually is a release for that.
Yes,
there is a way of both letting go and relieving stress and taking care of some of that bent up frustration or angst or whatever, and just go shoot some baskets or just go run around for a little while. Like I remember we had one of our sons who had so much energy. He were driving everybody crazy, just kind of like agitating the whole situation. And I just said, go run some laps. Yeah. And he ran around the house.
I know a lot of moms of boys who do that.
Yeah, and it's good.
Their boys run.
It's good for their physical, and he liked it.
Yeah,
he liked it. And
a happy boy is a tired boy.
That's right. And it's just like so again, just putting that all in context of there is a rationale and there's a wisdom and there's a design at work in the play of boys.
Because I think boys and men have a different relationship with their bodies than women do. I think that we are very much connected to our bodies and to, I just think about like a woman's cycle and just like what a woman's body is made for is more like a finely tuned watch. Yeah. It's lots of different intricacies. Very complicated. You have to take care of it, all of that.
So, sometimes more fragile at least.
Yes. But a man's body is more just like a hammer, and I think that men tend to push their bodies more, maybe even punish their bodies more, like in not a bad way, but in a disciplined kind of way. And I think that they're harder on themselves. Well, and I think it's more important, kind of going back to that boy thing, that boys are comfortable in their bodies. Yeah. It's so important that they are comfortable and confident in the strength and their ability, their physical abilities.
And I think that when you look at boys, they are heavily oriented. Their identity, they start to become a bit of what they do. And there's a healthy way of seeing that, and there's maybe going too far with that. But it's just like I need to be able to, with my body, with my physicality, all of us need a comfort and an acceptance and appreciation, men and women, of course. But speaking of boys, it's like if they don't have some basic skills, some basic competencies, physically, they will feel inferior, right? And boys.
This is good for parents to know.
And it's vital. Like again, if your child doesn't know how to catch a ball, right? That's a basic skill, right? It's a simple skill, but it's a skill that needs to be learned. It's not like it's innate. I mean, some kids it is really, they pick it up like a fish to water. But in general, we need to recognize that as parents, our kids, our boys need those kind of physical opportunities because, and oftentimes those are happening in the days gone by, they would happen within the family or in the neighborhood. Right. And our world is different today. And so we need to make sure we're engineering and if necessary, helping nudge that along in such a way that they can do it. Because if a boy doesn't feel like his body is working for him, or that he has been able to do it in such a way where he can garner enough respect, to stand his own. Because I wasn't the most athletic kid, but I could do enough where I was okay, right? I was never I was never a pro athlete. I didn't get I didn't play all the sports, but I could do some. I had enough physical prowess, if you will, to stand my own. Yeah. And
that's really important.
It is important. It's important to them to know I can do something good. I have some strength. I have some level of power. Your boys need to, again, in small little doses early on, but building up to those pre-adolescent years where their whole notion of I am good at something. And if they don't know that they are good at doing something, it really can cast a cloud and kind of a shadow over who they are. And again, there's this conflict of you aren't purely the identity of what you do, but much of your identity is formed by what you do, because it's like if I
for boys specifically.
Yeah, because if I repeat this action, it becomes a habit. The habit forms my character. The character forms a destiny, right? We know that translates from, an action into a habit into somewhat of an identity, right?
Yeah.
And there's a good wisdom to that. We aren't purely humans who do things. We are simply humans for being too, right? And that they were good unto itself. But there is a necessary part of our identity forming from things that we do.
Because I think
and can
if boys,
do and have a competency in.
Because if boys are communicating with their bodies, if their hierarchy is decided with their bodies, a boy has to be able to be comfortable with his body and to be able to hold his own when a group of kids are getting together to throw a football around or to, shoot some hoops or whatever. If a boy is 6, 7 years old and he doesn't know how to do that, he's not going to be able to not just hang out with those boys and find a place within that group, but he's going to be then less confident in himself.
And that's where it comes down. That's the key part. And when we suppress some of these boyish tendencies, right? These things that aren't as feminine, aren't as quiet or gentle, it actually can have a really super negative impact on them, because then it could be, you might be trying to correct a quote unquote bad behavior. But what oftentimes for a boy gets interpreted, I'm bad. If the things I'm doing are bad, because my identity
playing with swords, wrestling, pushing my brother around, whatever.
And it stifles their spirit, but it also impacts their identity.
Because, I was reading this, I put in this quote in here that according to experts, physical play and roughhousing promotes healthy intelligence, physical fitness, positive relationships, and actually provides endorphins and rushes of oxytocin. And oxytocin, that bonding hormone, I think that for boys, and I was reading something else about how boys need physical touch 3 times as much as girls do.
I like the way you touch me, just in case you're wondering.
3 times as much as girls to have that same response.
Yes.
Because they are they need to be touched, to be hugged, to be roughhoused, to be playing around with their friends. That's why little girls play together, and they don't necessarily, maybe they'll touch each other and give each other hugs, but I feel like little girls do more things with their hands and imaginative play and things like that. Where little boys playing together, they're constantly touching each other, pushing each other, messing around. They're always doing that.
Yeah.
And I think that connection with their bodies in a good way is important. But then it also can be translated into a lack of respect for their bodies in the form of risky behavior. A lot of times boys, we've all seen this, they push their bodies too much. They jump from here, then they jump from here, then they jump from here. They're pushing themselves, know? And it's usually the little girl who's standing there going, that's stupid, you shouldn't do that,
Were you that girl? Because there was always a girl. Little Lucy somewhere.
But that risky behavior, I think it comes from that, hey, I'm just going to push my body as far as it can go. And they're not thinking about, I could hurt my body.
And not recommending this, but I don't think there were too many girls who did this, what I did when I was a kid, where after watching Back to the Future, I remember grabbing the back of a car that didn't know I was there, some stranger. God. And I was on a skateboard getting pulled behind the car, and it was awesome until it wasn't, and until I wiped out before the car really sped up and took off. I crashed. Anyway, but I don't think there are many girls that do those kind of behaviors, right? Or
girls are too smart for that.
Yeah,
let's be honest, they are.
Because there is a certain connection that girls have with their bodies that I think is more integral or more caring. I don't think obviously all of us should care for our bodies, but I don't think that's the primary word boys think about when they think of their bodies. They think of their bodies as a
tool,
a tool for fun, adrenaline, joy, and ultimately it should be ordered towards the good, and that's what maturity brings. That's what virtue brings, right? Yes. But so oftentimes when we see this, though, it's boys that are fighting for respect, or they're in a certain sense they're competing for that pecking order. daughter of, oh my gosh, did you hear what Johnny did? You know,
I was reading this too, that it takes 3 boys to do something stupid. It's one boy to say, hey, I bet I can do this. The second boy to say, oh, I bet I can do it better. And then the third boy to be the judge.
Yeah,
you know, that's what happens. And we always say like the IQ of a group of boys is inversely proportional to the number of boys that are there. Right, so the more boys there are, the dumber the group gets.
That's right.
That has absolutely been our experience.
Yes. So there are those things to be
Packs
aware
of. Boys do dumb stuff.
We pray small kids, small problems or small consequences so that they can learn maturity as they get older.
And so we are going to talk about now, we're going to shift to what parents can do. But I do want to just maybe start off this section by saying exactly what you just said. Allowing appropriate risky behaviors when boys are young saves them from doing really stupid things when they are little.
Yeah, and I think I just want to zero in on that. Like as an example, using risky behavior for you, something that concerns you as a mom. A mom, women are more oriented towards safety than men are, right? And when our sons were, and our daughters too, but climbing trees, if they never are allowed to climb a tree when they're young, they can only physically get up so far when they're little. If they haven't learned it and then their first time they're climbing a tree is when they're 17, 18 years old, they can physically do it, but they don't necessarily have the competency, the courage, the balance, the skills needed. And that risky behavior is actually far more riskier because you didn't give them the right doses.
I would give another example of riding bikes down a hill off of ramps. Yes. Okay. That is definitely a risky behavior. And I've seen my boys do stuff. I mean, we would have them wear a helmet, but do stuff. And I'm like, they're going to kill themselves. Like they're going to, but if they're doing that kind of thing when they're 8 or 9 years old and they wipe out and then they hurt themselves,
they experience the consequences.
They are less likely to have it happen when they're on a motorcycle and try to jump off a ramp on a motorcycle when they're 17, 18 years old, or worse, with the car.
Yeah.
So I think that when you allow them to do those risky behaviors when they're little, where the stakes are low.
Within some bounds, right?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
But like, for example, like we had them wear a helmet. It's not like I'm going to have them, do these things without a helmet when they're riding down our hill over ramps and things like that. Or even like fires. Like, hey, having your 9-year-old boy learn how to make a fire, hey, I'd rather him do that with dad when he's 8 years old than be 17, 8 years old and not know how to make a fire and then just like, oh, we'll just do it here. We'll just throw this gasoline on it or, whatever. Then they do really stupid stuff.
That's right.
So you have to allow certain behaviors that kind of push the limits and they, risky behaviors and they learn that. Or even like the thing with the skateboard, it's just like, if you do that when you're young, you're less likely to be pulling a friend behind you.
That's right. That's right. And I'm cautious even with my boys in doing those things. Because, and really, so to answer the question of how do we appropriately teach again, we're talking about boys in this section, our boys to use their kind of aggressive nature in a good and wholesome way. How do we teach them limits? And the first way, kind of is this risky play, like having some modest, age appropriate. Second is both dads and siblings doing wrestling together, or tackle time, as we would sometimes call it, right? And I was just talking to one of our teenagers tonight, and they were talking about the music, because I'd always do this with our boys, and actually I did it with the girls too, but it was
designed for boys.
It was different for the girls and the boys. Like I still was a dad who tackled my girls and I played with my girls, but the boys were the ones who wanted to really go at it, where the girls just saw it as a kind of a tickling and blah, blah, blah. And we played the same game, but I had to play it uniquely different, and I had to control myself.
Just like
they were ready to
throw themselves. They had no fear.
And there were many moments where I wish I had more protection during this, but we were talking about it last night, and he brought it up about how
our 18-year-old.
Yeah, talking about how the music we played during that time, which I didn't remember. It's like, we'd always play Newsboys, or we'd do this, or 80s music, or whatever it was, and then Irish music, and blah, blah, blah. And it
it's
became
burned in his memory.
It is, and it was like a moment where we could really exchange power against power, and there were times when we played maybe rougher than one boy maybe got a little hurt, unintentionally by me or one of his siblings, and then there was a flash of anger, and I could be there to help direct it and tamp it down. Hey, get it. Did he mean, he didn't mean to, let's talk about that, blah, blah, blah. And walk him through how to deal with that anger so that his aggression didn't come out as fists flying against his brother.
Right.
And, but then he could see me and my strength and how my strength was restrained for them and used for the joy and the fun of everyone. And I then allowed them as they got older for them, like I would be the lava monster or whatever, and
all dads have their games,
right? Yeah.
Every dad.
If I want to hear more what other dads did.
Yes. You should ask that in the men's group thing.
So, but with that, allowing the older boys to begin playing that so they would do it with their younger siblings. And it taught them a level of control and taking their power, using their power, but recognizing this is play, this is enjoyment, this is how to have fun and still be aggressive and competitive without going over the line.
So I think that if there's any dads listening to this who don't wrestle or what we call tackle with their boys who are under the age of 10, you got to start. Yeah. You got to start, man. Just do it. Just do it. He'll love it. Yes. Guarantee. And it helps them go to bed. Yeah, it helps 100%. Them sleep so much better. And usually I did it too to help mom. Mom was doing other stuff. So I took all the kids and we were doing all this together, which was, and they were all entertained, closed in one room, crank up the music, and we had a blast. So another way that you can help your kids learn to be aggressive in an appropriate way. So there's a tackle right at home, but then it's just sports. Yeah. And when I say sports, I'm going to take organized sports out of the picture for a minute. I just mean just learning how, like we were saying before, learning how to throw a ball, learning how to run really fast, simple learning how skills. To hit a bat with, how to play baseball, have a basketball, outside, basketball net outside. Mm-hmm. All of these ways of boys getting confident with their bodies. And I think there's a part of me that kind of feels like all of the organized sports at such a young age has kind of diminished in maybe the minds of some parents, have diminished just playing with your kids outside. Because all of a sudden, if you were a soccer player, all of a sudden kicking a ball, playing soccer with your kid outside turns into a lesson. Right. Kids don't want a lesson. Yeah, sure. They just want to play. Yeah. They just want to mess around. Yeah. Who cares if they're doing it wrong? Yep. Who cares? Yeah. If that's too much of a temptation with you, then go play something else. Right. Go play something else with them. But I feel like organized sports has kind of in some ways ruined things for parents that they just can't go outside and play with their kids. All of a sudden it becomes my kid needs to be the best at whatever. No, they don't. No, they don't. It doesn't have to be training them for some competitive sport, but it is training them for life by just playing with them. Right. We've seen study after study the power of play. Yeah. Particularly dads leading play. So if you aren't a fun dad, figure it out, become a play, and it doesn't have to be just dads. I should say. Actually, too. I love throwing football with my boys. Yes. I think I would probably throw a football maybe more quickly than you would, as far as just picking it up, because I love it. Playing frisbee, playing mini golf. Yeah. We play all Spud, of these all things. These other games. Yeah, right? It's just playing, doing athletics with your kids outside. It's just so important. Particularly for boys, that they have that competency, and a basic level of competency. And as they get older, I do see a great value in organized sports that helps them on another level, right? Yeah. But again, what we're thinking about is the younger kids here. We're talking about the pre-adolescent boys, and I think sports, as they get older, in that closer pre-adolescent time, that the preteen time, I do think there is a value in getting little bits into the organized sports. Absolutely. Not that they couldn't do it earlier, but don't let that be your focus, and don't let that be the substitute for you playing with them. That's especially for that under 6 crowd. Right. They don't need any organized sports. They just need to play. The other thing is being aggressive in an appropriate way, and this may not strike you the right way at first, but with music. One of the things that we have seen with our boys, and this kind of like does edge more into the adolescence, but I'm just going to mention it anyway, is that funny enough, almost all of our boys have gone through a hip hop rap stage.
Which I do not understand.
But it's so funny because I've seen it with every. So our son Pat right now, who has 3 daughters and a son, and he is a country music fan. He does not listen to rap or hip hop. He went through that phase when he was like 11, 12, 13 years old of listening to that music. And now he's like totally way, way out of that stage. Mikey went through the same thing.
Mikey and Jimmy on some level. Right?
Yes. And I think that there's something about the aggressive nature of that kind of music that is helping boys kind of like that they like it.
Yeah, because again...
if there's something that's attractive to them.
Yeah, I don't fully understand it, but that's at play there.
It's just something that we've observed that I'm like, okay, I see a pattern here.
Yeah.
And so for some kids... especially as they get into high school, maybe it's playing the drums. Maybe it's listening to, a rock music. Maybe it's, all of these different ways that is a source of letting out that aggression. Think about how
arts and music can play into that role.
But then kind of like bringing it back down.
Yeah, and into the practicals.
The pretend play.
Yeah. So just thinking about going to those who are concerned about our kids playing with guns or concerned with this, the rules that we have set up for those kind of play is that when they're in imaginary things, we see this as a good space for them to be in, but we do have rules. One rule that we've always created is that you can't shoot somebody who doesn't have a gun. Right. So if I'm not playing or your sister, you can't chase your sister around the house if she doesn't have a gun.
And I will tell you why I made up that rule, because when our kids were little, I remember there's a little boy at our house when Katie was a baby who kept coming up to me and shooting me. And I was like sitting there, like talking with some adults, and he kept coming up shooting me. And I honestly found it annoying. And I thought to myself,
it's disrespectful too.
It was annoying. And I'm sure the parents were like, oh, he's just playing around. And I'm like, yeah, and I thought to myself, I'm never going to let my kid do that. And so as soon as our boys started playing with guns, and if they wanted to do that to me, I would just say, I don't have a gun. So I am an innocent bystander. You may not shoot me. Because I didn't want them going up and being disrespectful or annoying other adults.
Else, right.
And plus, it's a good lesson. That's right. It's a good boundary.
And so no shooting people who don't have a gun, because then that means you're in the game. Right. If you have a gun, game on. 2, you can't shoot yourself. Which we never really ended up being too big of a problem. It came in a couple little bits.
I know that I've seen that happen with one of our nephews was doing that. He was messing around and he pointed his gun at himself, and his father was like, no, you may not do that ever. Yeah. Because even playing that, I think it's good for them to know there's boundaries. We don't hurt ourselves. We don't even pretend to hurt ourselves.
Right.
And that's a boundary.
And again, these are good limits, I think, just to kind of make sure imaginary play is good and helpful and all of that. Mm-hmm. But then, kind of following this is that we don't, whether they're imaginary or otherwise, you don't shoot real things. Meaning, again, it kind of goes with it, don't shoot somebody who doesn't have a gun. Well, an animal, You don't shoot animals.
You don't shoot animals. You don't shoot real. I mean, they can shoot pretend animals, obviously, of course. They can shoot pretend animals. But actually, this was a rule that was made up by a friend of ours who is a police officer. And he said the boys, I remember they were outside when Pat was little, and they had a water gun. And they were shooting our dog with the water gun. And our friend was like, you know what? I don't allow them to do that, because he saw in his work that it goes to using a water gun to shoot the dog. Then it's a BB gun to shoot the dog. And then it moves to hurting actual people. Right. And I thought, and also that's mean to shoot an animal, like even a dog with a water gun. Dogs don't like that, of course. So, and I thought, that was always a rule too.
And those are the three basic rules when we have that in our home. And we have found order and again, water guns, not in the house. I mean, there are other little things, right? That's just, these simple things help steer that play in the right direction. Even
pretend play. So all of those things are ways to let them be aggressive appropriately. These are little tools that you can use. So, you can keep going. All right. So during these kind of aggressive play, people are going to say, well, the problem with this is that they wound up hurting their little brother.
Yes.
Or they wind up getting hurt. How do you react to that? And of course, getting hurt. First of all, let me just say to everybody, stop trying to protect your kids from not getting hurt. Okay? Yeah. It's just, first of all, it's pointless because all little kids get hurt. Second of all, I feel like little kids are made to get hurt in the sense that
they are so flexible.
They are so flexible.
I don't understand it, but
so
they bounce down the stairs when I would be like, every bone in my body would be broken, and they're like, get up and they shake themselves off and they keep walking.
They are so, even physically, little kids are so much more resilient. Like their bones are more flexible. They have like more blood flowing through them than adults do. And I think for a little kid to get a skinned knee, to get stitches, all of those, I wouldn't wish it on my children, but we have to stop being afraid of them getting hurt because they're going to be okay. And that's part of life.
Yeah. And just recognizing that it's going to happen.
Right.
You try to minimize any serious, obviously, eliminate, all the serious stuff. What can you do when it does happen, right? So accidentally somebody Johnny gets hit with the sword, right? And or a gun accidentally, there's not a real gun, but it gets poked or something happens in aggressive play. Well, one, we don't allow our kids to tattle, right? So in the first part of this, when you have one kid tattling on the other, it really creates this wrong feedback loop for your kids. And we want to be able to, on some level, stay a little bit more removed. We want them to work this out.
Right.
We have a whole podcast, I believe, on sibling conflict resolution and all of that.
So I'll give you an instance. So two kids are playing. There's three kids there, right? Two kids are playing. One inevitably hurts the other. And the third child, who is not the victim or the perpetrator, the third child comes in and says to me, Johnny hit Joey with the sword or whatever. I literally would just ignore them. I would just be like, well, if they're hurt, they can come. They know where I am. You can go tell them, and then just say,
and
go away.
And it's not coldness.
It's not coldness,
it's
but
because we want to empower. The goal is we want to help empower them.
Right. And to say, look, sometimes I would ask, well, can he walk? Because if he can walk, he can come and get me, or to allow those two children, the victim and the perpetrator. But one of the best things I think can actually happen when you have a child who hurts another child, if you don't intervene, I know that sounds awful, but if that happens, I think one of the best things that can happen is that the adult completely stays out of it. And the aggressor, the kid who hurt them, can see what they've done.
Yeah.
And see that, especially if it's a sibling. Because you think that they're just going to be like, and take that, But if there's a child sitting there crying, it is a very rare instance where you're going to have the other child have no pity at all and no concern at all. Maybe initially they would, run away or not notice or whatever. But I think so many times it's better to just allow them to work that out. And then if they're really hurt, they'll come to you. Or the perpetrator will come to you and say, we were playing swords and I hit them over the head and now he's a big gash, or now he's crying, or I think he needs ice or whatever. I've had kids run into the kitchen and get ice and ice pack themselves for a brother or sister, who they hurt. That's the empowering that we want to have. We don't want to be constantly intervening in our children's conflicts.
Well, and I think it's important too. You kind of implied in some ways, but we try not to intervene. We try to make sure we don't reward or play into tattletaling. But because we want to empower them, sometimes they need words, right? Sometimes they need the verbiage to use to express. Because again, for boys, it's not hardwired their emotional to their communication, right? To their verbal communication. And so they might need some help saying, okay, let's talk about how you stand up for yourself. How do you declare you don't want to play this way, or this isn't, whatever. And again, thinking about them long-term, not just in this moment, but saying, I want you to be able to learn how to deal with conflict. And again, conflict on a small little level is consequences on a small level.
And so I would say, like, if boys are fighting, then if you don't want him to hit you, or if you don't want to fight, you don't want to play this game, you need to say, stop hitting me, or say, you may not hit me.
Right.
You know, you have to stand up and say, you may not hit me. And if they continue and they hit you anyway, then you may come to me. Then you may come to me and you can say, I told him to stop hitting me and he wouldn't stop.
Right.
That, to me, that's an appropriate time because they have tried it on their own and it didn't work because the communication is breaking down.
Right.
And so that's when an adult can come in and say, hey, he asked you to stop hitting him, quit it.
Absolutely.
Okay? And if you don't stop, then then I'm going to take away whatever you have or you can't play with them or blah, blah, blah,
And that's how we create
whatever.
a safe environment for our kids. That
Exactly.
they know that, not that we're always there lurking in the background, but that every now and then we're paying attention to know when we need to step in. And when there are as clear lines being drawn. But like a perfect example is that I'll have one son, young son, who is maybe attacking an older brother, right? And he doesn't want to get hurt, but he keeps going after the bigger. Well, you know what? He's got to learn that
you play with the bull, you're going to get the horns, kid.
Like, and that's there's some wisdom in that.
Yeah.
Anyway, but that's the
also kind of likewise, just kind of going on that with the girls. I have seen our teenage preteen girls poke their brothers, and then their brothers turn around and they will shove them. And I'm not saying it's right for them to do that, but then the girls wind up actually getting hurt. And now we've had to tell the boys, you cannot be physical with your sister at all.
Right.
But for our daughters to realize, don't do that. Do not provoke a boy. I know you're just messing around, but don't provoke him physically. That's not a good idea. You don't want to get in the ring with a guy.
Right.
That's
not a thing.
As a young woman, don't even go there. And I know, but girls have to learn that because when, they're becoming a woman themselves, when they're 11, 12 years old, when you have brothers around, you have to realize, they're a lot stronger than you are. And you don't want to really get to that point. The other verbiage that I think is very important is the verbiage of reconciliation, which we've talked a lot about, of forgiveness.
And this is how you know siblings won't end up in conflict forever.
Exactly. And so when you have somebody who says, stop hitting me, and the other kid doesn't stop, okay, then they come to you, okay, then what do? Then you say, hey, he told you to stop hitting him. This is wrong. You need to ask his forgiveness. And so they need to be taught to say, I hit you when you told me to stop. It was wrong of me to do that. Will you forgive me? And then the other crying child with an ice pack on his head needs to say, I forgive you. And there needs to be that reconciliation there. And I think that is a very important part of not allowing the emotions to kind of overwhelm whatever the situation is. But kids need to be taught that because they don't know how to reconcile, right? They don't know how to ask forgiveness of each other. And that's what we teach them.
And again, just kind of skipping forward, thinking a little bit here about our boys and their physical nature. Again, we talked about how that's important to boys, which also means they need hugs. They need physical touch. There is something appropriate and good and wholesome. Boys, again, they have emotions, but they don't always communicate them. They're not as present or maybe as verbally seen and heard.
Right.
So you need to be more attentive to their body language. Go ahead. Well, just if they're acting out, right? If they're either keeping to themselves more than they used to, or they're just more grumpy, or they're short fuse and they're lashing out, whatever those little signs might be, pay attention. And if you see that, and this is true for all kids, but particularly for boys, they may not know how to verbalize it. Maybe just go and say, just give me a hug. Bring them in, because there's something just redeeming about the embrace of a mom or an embrace of a dad for a little boy. Again, this is true for all kids, but particularly for boys in their physical nature. Sometimes they don't always need to verbalize everything. I mean, we do want to help them with the words sometimes, but other times it might just be, I just need a hug.
It's okay if they don't verbalize it, even if just rubbing their back. Actually one of my teenage boys was in the kitchen the other day and I was like, what's going on? He was like, I don't know, I'm just off today. And I just stood there and just rubbed his back as I was talking to him, just touching him, and they need that. Right. As a matter of fact, I think they need that physical touch.
They do.
More than girls do. And I mean, we've had some boys who cry more easily at 9, 10. I remember even having a conversation about one of our boys. You were concerned. You were like, gosh, he cries all the time.
I know.
But I think that being able, no, he doesn't cry now,
Right. But it was a real.
But I think the message needs to be, hey, it's okay. It's okay for them to cry. It's good for them to express their emotions, and just to allow that. Don't point it out. We don't need to be
you don't need to linger on it.
Yeah,
really,
you don't need to linger on it.
Because it can become self-conscious for them, but you do want to receive it.
Yeah.
And kind of hold it as something sacred.
You're kind of like, I'm sorry, you're so upset. How can I help you? Not, why are you crying? Well, you seem to be crying all the time. But don't cry. Don't cry.
Yeah, big boys don't cry. No, that's not a thing, right?
Yeah,
it's
say, hey,
okay.
what's going on? And almost like ignore the crying in the sense of you don't have to draw attention to it, because this one psychologist I was listening to was saying if you draw attention to it, then they start stuffing it down.
Right. They don't want you to make a big deal usually.
Exactly. But it's okay to just sit in silence, give them a hug. Hey, what's going on? How can I help you?
Right.
You seem really upset about this. And or even just that physical hug is so very important. So
right.
I think that's good.
Yeah. All right. So
okay. So let's do our key takeaways. Okay. So key takeaways here: violent play in young boys. It's natural when it comes from within their own mind. Okay, not from images, not from R-rated movies, but it's not even just harmless, but it's actually important to allow them to play that aggressive play.
All right. Boys work out their emotional parts of their lives physically, right? So the verbal and emotional parts of the brain aren't hardwired as girls are, so they need that physical play to communicate and express their emotions.
Getting your boys comfortable and confident in their bodies is actually essential for their emotional and mental health.
Yeah, and boys' emotions are just as present and as deep as they are in girls. They, again, just can't express it as clearly, and they do it differently and physically.
And it needs to be responded to differently.
True story.
Okay, and so, maybe some good couple discussion questions. Maybe talk to your spouse, especially, I just want to say for you moms, you really need to listen to your husband's wisdom on how to treat boys. Because guess what? And I've said this before. I know it's a shocking statement. Your husband was once a little boy. You were never a little boy. So when your husband feels strongly about something about how to handle your boys, I think you need to pay attention to that. So I think those conversations about what do I find the hardest thing to deal with in my boys? Yeah. That is a great conversation to have. And also then kind of following off of that, how can I have a deeper respect for the way that my sons are made?
Right. How do we have a united plan, united approach to recognizing that design and teaching proper boundaries and limits for our kids and for our hearts as well? Okay, let's say a prayer. All right. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, amen. All right, Lord Jesus, we thank you so much for our sons. We thank you for the young men, the boys in our lives. We ask you to bless them, keep them safe, keep them close to you. Please give their parents the wisdom that they need to guide them and to form them and to shape them, and to, most importantly, delight in the way that they are made. We ask this all through Christ our Lord. Amen. Amen. Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen. And again, if you want to find out any of the great things we're doing, make sure to check out messyfamilyproject.org and like and subscribe. And until next time, may the Lord bless you and keep you.